lighting of all energy transitions in the world, in terms of a very large population of 1.4 billion people, with a GDP per capita of $12,000. Compare that to the United States, $69,000. That makes it the second largest economy in the world. And China is a centrally planned command economy, currently going through the 14th five-year plan of 2021 to 2025. And in that plan, it aims to be a moderately developed economy by 2035, with domestic consumption driving growth and reducing the urban-rural disparities. And in that five-year plan, energy plays a major role. Energy security is a major theme. Advancing the low-carbon transition is a major theme, and building a modern energy system is a major theme. So China is pursuing 5 strategies to achieve that. The first one is to boost renewables. The second one is to optimize, is their word, the fossil fuel use. The third one is to modernize power grids. And the fourth one is to improve energy efficiency and innovation. And against that background, we today start our tour by just reminding ourselves on how much energy China consumes. So this is China overall energy. We see where you see marker 1 in the past 20 years or 23 years, you see the rapid growth period. We see marker number 2, it leveling off. In part, it's a COVID effect. Part, it's some of the economic woes of China right now, and nobody quite knows where that will go. And then where you see marker 3, we just see the simple, clear dominance of coal in the overall energy economy. If I show that same picture just on the same set of axes for each of the forms of energy, you can see coal dominant in the middle, and you can see where renewables, say solar and wind, where everybody always asks, or hydropower and nuclear, where it is on the same scale visually. If we leave the energy sector behind and we look at the electricity sector, here we can see the very clear rapid growth still in electricity in the country, marker number 1. Number 2, you can see coal dominates, as everybody knows, the electricity sector. You can see the important role of hydro, and then rapidly growing at the top, marker number 4, both wind and solar, as we will come back to. All tours of Chinese energy starts with coal, and President Xi Jinping is very clear: economic progress in China will not be constrained by energy availability in all these major speeches. And for that reason, when we look at down below us at China, you can see the really big, large coal-fired power plants in the country. Each of those red markers is a big coal-fired power plant. They're building those much faster than they're building nuclear. The reality is that the capacity utilization or load factor on those power plants is declining because coal is not generating a lot more. So capacity is expanding faster than coal-fired power generation. China has the world's 4th largest coal reserves after the USA, Russia, and Australia. Now says, what do we do with that resource? And we'll talk about energy security in a moment. Let's go to marker number 1. You can see a coal-fired power plant by the name of Tuoco. And we look down from space at Tuoco. Those of us who've not seen a coal-fired power plant before, number 1 is the coal stack. And number 2 are the 10 big boiler holes in a row. 3 is the cooling towers, and 4 is the dry cooling. China is in many places a dry country, so it's dry cooling for some of the later units. And this is 6,720 megawatts of Chinese design, Chinese EPC, Chinese construction, Chinese operation, and each of the other power plants are as well run, well designed, and laid out as this one. Some kilometers away from it sits the coal mine that feeds it. If you've not seen an open cast coal mine before, this is the largest coal mine in China, has 390 billion tons of coal. And you can see where marker 1 is a big open cast area. Market 2, you can see where the coal is assembled, and number 3 is the railway line that takes it to Tuo. Also a typical situation. Most of the Chinese coal-fired plants are built close to coal fields, not necessarily on at an associated coal field. Speaking of coal, the other big use of coal in China is for blast furnaces to make steel. This graphic from Visual Capitalist shows that China already in the year 2000 overtook Europe as the biggest steel manufacturer in the world. Produces, where that red bullet is on the right-hand side now, 1 billion tons of steel per year, which is 54% of world production. And as I said earlier, steel is a major user of coal. And on this map, we see the large steel mills in China. You can see, firstly, that China doesn't have a great deal of iron ore, so most of it comes in from Australia and Brazil. But there's still a domestic production base as well. And each of the markers that you see on screen is a large either blast furnace or electric arc furnace or induction furnace, concentrated in the southeast of the country on the coastal area, with some associated air quality problems from that. And we next go to Shanghai, just because steel is the dominant construction material in China. And Shanghai, for 2 reasons, is named the Steel City, because of the fantastic number of buildings that have a steel superstructure, 1. And 2, Shanghai has 5 big steel mills itself in its outskirts. So this link between Chinese construction and Chinese steel making, very clear. I turn to oil next because China is the world's largest oil importer. It's very concerned about oil security, especially in the South China Sea and the Straits of Malacca, and has a certain dilemma because of the long border that it shares with Russia. How much oil how reliant can it become on Russia? Melanie, could you just go on to mute? The 2 main sources of Chinese oil is Russia and Saudi Arabia, and China carefully balances the declining onshore production, as we will see in them, with its rising offshore production with its imports. I take you to the northeast of the country, to Heilongjiang province, and what you see below you is quite an interesting picture. From space, you can see the city top left, and then where the red dots are, you can see small white dots. Each of those dots is a well pad of the largest onshore field, Daqing, in China, which has been producing since 1960, is declining, is being water flooded, and in a desperate attempt to keep up Chinese onshore oil production. Onshore oil production is about 3 million barrels per day. But the growing part of Chinese oil production comes from the South China Sea, in the offshore Guangdong, comes from the East China Sea, offshore Shanghai, and comes from Bohai Bay in the northeast of the country. And the king of Chinese offshore production is CNOOC, the Chinese National Offshore Oil Company. And every year, CNOOC lifts the production from rigs such as this one that you see in the water, the inland shallow waters of Bohai Bay. China is a very, very dominant player in world oil refining, and processes about 20% of global crude oil since 2022. And we have seen a very rapid growth in Chinese refining and petrochemical capacity during the recent years. It is still quite state-dominated, with Sinopec and PetroChina dominating different provinces that have been awarded them, slowly being liberalized. Many of the refineries are being modernized to improve efficiency. And let's just see what a big refining and petrochemical complex looks like. And near Shanghai, we go to Zhoushan. And what you see here is what could be anywhere in the world in terms of modernity. This is the world's largest crude to chemicals project, privately owned, produces mostly ethylene for the Chinese chemical industry, and proudly privately owned in terms of the liberalization of the Chinese economy. I also take you to the Russian border with China. Most of the Russian oil comes across via railway line. And this is a place called Zabaikalsk. And you can see the railway line from space. And where that red dot is, you can see the railway cars. And they currently, as Russia's taken over from Saudi Arabia as the largest oil exporter to China, those railway cars are running 24 hours a day to maximize Russian oil exports at undisclosed prices in terms of discounts into China. India is the other beneficiary of Western sanctions on that. But the geopolitical implications for China as it tries to strengthen and diversify its energy ties, and Russia trying to find alternatives among sanctions is quite profound. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but China has 1.7 million public charging stations for electric vehicles, and that's going to impact future Chinese oil demand, as we also know. And China is currently adding, listen to this number, 100,000 new chargers per month. 100,000, and they are AC chargers, DC chargers, fast chargers. Prices vary by location, by charging level. Quite amazing. And I show you this one not because of a past connection with Shell, but it's probably the most impressive charging station in the world, run by Shell near Shenzhen Airport in the south of the country. 258 charge points, one next to the other at the airport. Quite amazing. Hydro, as we saw in the opening slides, opening pictures, is really important in China. And in fact, China is the world's largest producer of hydroelectricity. And each of the blue markers that you see is a major hydroelectric plant. When I say major, at least 2,000 megawatts each. You can see quite clearly that they sit in the south of the country. The northern part is dry of the country. And as we will see in a moment, these dams have, on the one hand, lifted millions out of poverty in terms of the construction programs, but has also had significant flooding, habitat, and displacement impacts. Let's visit two of those big hydro dams. One is Three Gorges, and the other one is called Bahitan at you see markers 1 and 2. We look down from space at the Three Gorges dam, and what you see below you, where marker 1 is the Yangtze River. Number 2 is the world's largest power station at 22,000 megawatts. And marker number 3 is the lock behind it. It's been in operation since 2012. And China considers this a social and economic success, also in terms of impact on emissions and air quality. But the dam has also been quite controversial, both domestically and abroad, because the construction of the dam displaced 1.3 million people, submerged 13 cities and 140 towns. So that's a China scale project. We go to just see, because China has just so many good engineers, including hydro engineers. And this is the Bahitan Dam under construction, where that red dot is. You can see the double curvature arch dam, big concrete dam. We'll look at it in another picture in a moment. Right now, 4,000 megawatts are in operation, and a further 12,000 to come. And to build this high up in the mountains that you see here, that dam will require building at altitude, building in an area which is earthquake prone, and with the strong seasonality of the river, which is an upper run of the Yangtze River, also have to deal with varying generation at different pressure levels within the reservoir. A real feat of civil engineering and mechanical engineering for China. I turn next to gas in China, and with the headline of China's importing LNG and gas for the environment, and also faces here a certain Russian dilemma. But let's just first look at China and its main gas transmission system. The red lines are the big transmission lines for gas across the country. And what happened first in the beginning of 20 years ago was that China built a west to east pipeline that you can see there. Then China brought in Central Asian gas from Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan route as its first imported gas. It then began the process of building, you can see up and down that coast, which will come back to a series of LNG import terminals. And the ones that you see up and down that coast are in operation and planned. Then brought in a pipeline from Myanmar, and then 4 years ago, the Russian Power of Siberia pipeline from the far east of Russia came in from one of the big newly developed fields specifically for this pipeline. And now the discussion is, now that Europe has said goodbye to Russia in terms of gas supply via pipelines, whether those Western fields that normally used to supply Russia used to supply Europe, can now supply China in future through the so-called Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, which you can also see passes through Mongolia, which is one additional matter and party to be appeased in the process. Don't know how long those negotiations will continue. On the back of those gas imports, China has built a significant number of large gas-fired power plants, some run off pipeline gas, some of imported LNG. And we go next to a place called Putian and look down from space at Putian port. And what you see by marker number 1 is 6 big LNG tanks that LNG brought in by ships. And the far right, where marker number 2 is a big combined cycle gas turbine, probably running at 60-70% efficiency, Chinese design. And I referred earlier to, and we saw briefly on the map, the Chinese LNG import terminals. China or Europe has now overtaken China in terms of demand as a result of the dynamic with Russia. But China has overtaken Japan for quite some time and will overtake Japan. And we see along the Chinese coast, each of the big cities has one or more LNG import terminals. And we're going to visit 2, Wenzhou, and also in the north, Tianjin. And not only there is still a similar number of LNG import terminals under construction to the ones that you see on screen. And here we see from the International Gas Union LNG report, the Wenzhou LNG receiving terminal, which has just been commissioned, in fact, in August 2023, and feeds eastern central China. This goes into the pipeline, and you can see an LNG carrier alongside where marker 1 is, feeding into one of the 4 offloading tanks, storage tanks on the right-hand side. In the northern city of Tianjin, we see these 2 floating regasification and storage units. And the significance and why I show it today is because China can now build these in the Hudong Zonghua shipyard in Shanghai itself as well. So then an LNG carrier simply comes on next door and alongside and offloads into it. Next, we take a quick tour of nuclear power in China. Etienne, can you just go on to mute? Thank you. For cooling reasons, built along the coast, we see in purple marker the nuclear power plants along the Chinese coast. China has 56 operable nuclear reactors with 53 gigawatts of capacity. The fleet is really young. It's a 10-year-old fleet. And they together, all those plants generate about 5% of the country's electricity. China completely dominates the market for new build nuclear with 23 more reactors under construction last year. Most of them are pressurized water design, but China is actively exploring advanced pressurized water reactors, high temperature gas cooled reactors, as we will see in a moment, because China wants to export also that to the rest of the world. Let's visit two nuclear power plants, one in the south, Yangyang, and in the north, Shidao Bay. And here you see Yangyang nuclear power plant, and you can see where the three red dots are. You can see the 6 nuclear reactors built in a row from one after the other. You can see the big turbine halls, the white buildings where the power is generated. And China, by doing these are 6,000 megawatt power plant. And by doing this, China builds at scale to get cost down. We also travel to the north of the country to Shidao Bay. And what you see where that red dot is the world's first pebble bed high temperature gas cooled modular reactor. And this one uses helium instead of water to produce power. It's a Chinese design. It shuts down when the power system around it fails. It shuts down automatically to not have a repeat of what happened at Fukushima Daiichi. And really, I expect this to be one of the big export projects of China in terms of technology in future, where it has to compete with mainly Russia next door and Korea and France for international market share. Next, we move into renewables. And what you see on your screen in this map is each of the tiles is a solar farm in China. World's largest solar installed capacity, mix of both utility scale and rooftop. The 14th five-year plan that I spoke of earlier prioritizes renewables, boosts solar for development, but to find land, as we will see in a moment, large solar farms are often having to be located in deserts and in the mountains. And we're going to visit a number of solar farms. The first one is in Western China, the Gonghe Talatan solar farm. Now, the Solar Fundai will dispute whether this is one or many solar farms. That area that you see covered by solar panels is a massive 610 square kilometers. So you can do your own calculations of roughly 25 kilometers by 25 kilometers. You can see it's mostly PV, but where the second dot is bottom left, the red dot, you can also see a heliocentric CSP power plant. Interesting story is here that a lot of grass now grows from the runoff of cleaning the panels, and sheep graze between them. We go to the north of China for our second visit, and what do we see here? This is Datong, one of the 3 gigawatts of capacity. But I left from space the red dots for you to see how these in the search for land, these panels and solar farm units are all across mountainsides to gain access to land because land is in short supply in the country. And then we turn to wind, where China is constructing wind faster than anybody else and expanding into the offshore. And what we see here is a map courtesy of wind power, and the number that you see in each of the round circles, is the number of wind farms in that area, not the number of wind turbines in that area. And China has last year generated 389 terawatt hours for those who are electrically minded, and is targeting by 2030 1.2 terawatts of installed capacity. Also, the current 14th five-year plan drives wind development. And let's visit in the Gobi Desert, where you see marker number 1, and on the Chinese offshore off Shanghai in Jiangsu province. Let's look at one onshore and one offshore wind farm. Now, this picture in some ways is not spectacular as you look down from space on the Gansu wind farm, but in that white area that you see below you, you can see the rows in the desert, and that's 7,000 wind generators generating 10 gigawatts of capacity, and that will go to 20,000 megawatts in the desert as soon as the transmission interconnection is built. And I'll come back to transmission interconnection as a constraint in a moment. So heading to 20,000 gigawatts in a single large wind farm. And we go to Jiangsu province on the eastern side of China, and you can see the coastline, and you can see stacked from Ganyu at the top, which is a small 400 megawatt offshore wind farm, all the way down to Qidong in the south, the offshore wind farms going up, many of them done by a company called China Three Gorges. And I take you to just show you at one of the wind farms what a Goldwind, and the largest manufacturer now has overtaken Vestas in terms of capacity. That Goldwind now has 16 megawatt turbines, and the diameter, the rotating diameter of that is 252 meters. That you see, you can see this is fixed bottom, not floating. Quite amazing to see those in the sea in Jiangsu province. And also show you here in the background, you can see one of those wind farms in the Jiangsu offshore, but in the foreground you see a converter station, AC to DC converter station to bring the power onshore, being towed out to be installed in the area. As one would expect, given the rate of change in the Chinese electricity system and energy system, and as the country electrifies many industrial processes, it needs to make sure that it has a stable transmission system, which is currently quite transmission constrained. This map that you see below us here is the national ultra high voltage AC and DC system of China. And what do we see? We see in the northwest of the country, where marker number 1 is, that is a largely unpopulated area. So big wind and solar farms being built in that area, but that power needs to be brought to the east of the country where it is needed. 2, the big load center in China sits around Shanghai, one, and the other one is in Guangdong in the south. So a lot of strengthening into the Shanghai area that you can see on the right-hand side where marker number 2 is. And in the south of the country, the China Southern Power Grid has been electrically separated to make it more stable, and supplies the southern provinces and southern cities of the country to make sure that the power system security and stability is maintained. I'm for a moment going to answer the question which must be on your lips by now, which is, so, and what about storage? And the big thing in China is pump storage. And looking down at the map of China, each of the markers with a P and a blue name next to it is one of the large pump storage stations in the country. There are 38 very large pump storage stations, and they have a total storage capacity of 1,000 gigawatt hours and 36 gigawatts of installed capacity. And China continues to build them. They will take that to 120 gigawatts by 2030. Let's visit one pump storage plant and one battery storage system. The pump storage is Fengming in the north. You can see where marker 1 is. And then we can go to a battery storage in Dalian City, where marker number 2 is. And what you see here is the upper reservoir in Hubei province of Fengming, the world's largest pump storage station. This is 3,600 megawatts, 40 gigawatt hours of capacity, earthquake proof. And this pump storage station, in my mind, has a similar electrical storage capacity as all the utility scale battery storage systems in the world together. And our next visit is here in Shanghai to Dalian, where we see the Dalian redox flow battery, and where that red dot is a battery storage system. And this is vanadium based, not lithium ion. And the two big advantages of lithium of vanadium in this redox flow battery is that you can have an infinite number of recharge cycles, and it's non-flammable. When we put all of that together in terms of China becoming the electrostate that Mary spoke of in the opening remarks, we see quite clearly that when it gets to the top 10 global wind turbine makers in the world, with the 2023 numbers not out yet, Goldwind and Envision and Mingyang and Windy and Sany and CRRC are all Chinese. You can see the installed capacity still is largely onshore, but moving increasingly in light blue offshore. And Goldwind's factories in China are absolutely fantastic, modern, could be American, to be frank. And here we look down at Shanghai Electric, which makes for General Electric and for Vestas turbine blades as an example. And you can see the turbine blades stacked for being exported by ship to the rest of the world, but also for the Chinese market. 7 of the 10 largest solar panel manufacturers in the world are located in China. You can see JA Solar in Beijing, Longi in Xi'an, Sontec in Wuxi, Trina in Jiangzhou, Jinko in Shanghai, and Ryzen in Ningbo. And half of their capacity is installed in China, and the other half is available for the international market. Everybody on this call is probably aware of the geographical and geopolitical concentration of that, and that Europe and the USA is saying, how do we stop that and prevent the electrostate of becoming our sole supplier of solar panels? And these are modern factories. You can see robot assembly here in a Jinko solar panel factory. The same holds to a very large degree for world battery manufacturing capacity. This is the CATL Guiyang battery plant in the south of the country, the largest battery manufacturing plant. And this overlay simply shows you for 2022, China produced 70% of the lithium ion battery of the world. And by 2027, China and the world will expand it 8-fold in terms of capacity, but China will still be at 70% of lithium ion capacity expected. The same goes for electrolyzers, and electrolyzers are being built, operated, installed, designed, dreamed about in the United States, in Europe, as we can see, in Korea, in Australia, in India, and in China. But big Chinese companies such as Longi are firstly doing battle with other Chinese companies such as Peric and Sungrow for electrolyzer, and this is one of their factories, but also with their foreign partners, foreign competitors. I, for a moment, take you to northern China, to an area in Baotao Industrial City, which produces rare earths. And this is China is paying a price for being the factory of the world. And you see here the slurry dam in the center of town, where on an unlimited basis, waste is simply being, metallic waste is being, and acids are being dumped in the middle of the city. And China at some stage is going to have to deal with that reality. I begin to close by saying China targets net zero not by 2050, but by 2060. Climate Tracker deems them to be quite insufficient. Let's quickly look at what the numbers say in terms of Chinese emissions. We see in the period from 1990 to 2030, the rise in Chinese emissions, and where marker 1 is, you can see how rapidly that rose as China built all those coal-fired power plants that we saw earlier. We can see that it appears to have leveled off right now, but there are many scenarios as to where China can go. Its announced policies and actions may levelize that out at 14 gigatons, or the world is demanding of China in the COP discussions that China gets it down immediately and gets down to about 6 gigatons by 2030. China has not committed to that or presented a plan to go there yet. And this is at the heart of what the discussions at COP. Maybe I close by just looking at some of the takeaways to summarize. Today, and still by 2030, the largest importer of coal, oil, and gas, largest installed base of solar panels, wind turbines, and batteries. But by 2030, we'll generate more power from renewables, nuclear, and hydro together than from coal. It's changing quite rapidly. World's largest emitter, but by 2030, I expect greenhouse gas emissions from China to have peaked, or China to have delivered on its own pronouncement that it will do so. By 2060, it will have the largest nuclear, hydro, solar, wind, and pump storage capacities in the world. By 2060, it will still be the largest manufacturer of solar panels and wind turbines and storage batteries and electrolyzers, the electrostate that Mary referred to, and working hard on the offset side on electrification, including electric arc furnace and induction furnaces, carbon capture and storage, and bioenergy to decarbonize steel, cement, and chemicals. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Andy, and everyone's welcome to rejoin on the video, but do please keep